there's a ton of things that players have absolutely overlooked in Etheria Restart. And one of those things I would say is going to be the lowest rarities in the game, the R rarities. So we're gonna go ahead and jump right into it because I feel like these units bring immense value to the game. They actually are able to even be useful in a lot of different setups going into things where it's like progressing into mid game, into late game. I even feel like there are going to be some spontaneous things that come out of these units as we start to push into different strategies, and I would even say some really big plays that players might utilize in RTA. Vice is probably definitely one of the more like overlooked out of the R's just because no one talks about them. And I think that that's okay, right? Like that happens. Sometimes, you know, you're talking about a fresher game. Not every unit is going to get their moment to shine right away. And it doesn't necessarily even mean that the value of the unit changed. It could have always been that, but now players are more aware of it. What's really interesting about Vice actually has the ability to basically deal 120% damage to all enemies with an additional damage equaling to 15% of HP. And there is a 65% chance to inflict a 2-turn of attack break. And the big thing here, which is set turn meter back by 30%. A 30% turn meter pushback is pretty massive when we're talking about, again, some of the like strongest pushbackers in the game that like, you know, we love and we also hate at the same time, like Kraken. Kraken has basically a 35% turn meter pushback. Granted, he does have that with the CC freeze, but that pairing is really, really strong still, with you being able to still be able to have the attack down, which is decreasing your opponent's attack and then pushing them back. So it's like, okay, even if they do get a turn, they're not necessarily going to be dealing nearly as much damage. Another thing that's really important, and this is one thing that I want to make sure that you guys are always paying attention to with these characters, is the attribute. This is a constant attribute unit. And now why is that important as well? Because we have attribute exclusive content. If you're looking for an option for things like pushback, push forward, whatever it may be, there are literally R rarity games that are R rarity units that can be supplemented in the game to be able to give you some value in content that you might not necessarily would have had, like say like the SSR, right? In replacement, you would say like, okay, I don't have Marvel. You can still use someone like Vice for that pushback. Granted, it's not coming with like the silence and the, you know, the pushback and the, you know, skill 1, but it is still some form of it, which I think is still really, really valuable. In the skill 1, you have the taunt, 30% chance to do that. And you also have that for 1 turn. And you basically also are going to also deal 2 hits with a chance to deal additional damage equal to 8% of your HP. So that's okay, right? Nothing too crazy. But the other thing that actually is kind of interesting with this character is that each time Vice successfully inflicts a debuff on an enemy, he heals himself for 25% of his max HP and purifies 1 debuff with full HP. He then will heal the ally with the lowest HP percentage. So he has kind of like one of those interesting passives. Again, there's not a lot of other characters that share this. This is something that he just kind of is able to do. I mean, you got like dudes like Rahu, for example, but him being able to remove debuffs, which is kind of interesting. I think that with a 25% heal is actually quite significant when you really think about it. So 25% HP restoration. He then has the damage that comes from HP itself as well. That's a lot of value considering that this is a R rarity unit, right? And granted, it's not anything that I feel like is gonna break the game, but it's definitely going to be something that will help you out tremendously in certain aspects and certain moments. You never know. It might be Vice that might get you through a piece of content because you don't have any other alternatives. And the crazy thing is I can even see a character like this being able to work in things like Terra Matan, for example, just simply because of the fact that he has a lot of the elements, not really the taunt, but the pushback, the attack break, and even the restoration. Like say he's the target for the defense break, he can remove that and then also restore his own HP. That's actually something that, again, I was like, you know, that's actually something that could technically work, right? Now, next up, we have number 41. Okay. Now, number 41 is actually, again, very straightforward in her value. I think a lot of players seen firsthand how good she was, but it was never really any secret in terms of how good number 41 was. The biggest thing that she's bringing to the table is a 35% turn meter push and a 2-turn of attack up. Now, this actually makes her the highest burst turn meter pusher in the game. And that's something that I think is like, you know, worth, you know, really speaking to when we're talking about these low rarity units. Something that I really like. I think even like players like, you know, at the higher end spectrums really liked that you could rotate in characters like this and they can still be effective. And I know some players would like, you know, look at the fact, oh, well, they don't have the highest base speeds. It doesn't matter. They can still be rotated into a team comp and still work, right? Like the characters don't necessarily have to be the first character going, but they can also be a part of a comp. They can still make a comp tick. They can still make a comp work. And so you follow that up with the heal over time in the skill 2 for 3 turns, which is pretty nasty, to be honest. And then the heal block in the skill 1. Yeah, that's a pretty solid unit. I mean, it's very straightforward, but again, if you're lacking in that area of having a rotator, you know, this is a unit that even in my progression, like we just had in this beta, a lot of players seen me breezing through the game with her, you know, with the corresponding pushback that I had. If I was using Kraken, for example, it was like really her and Kraken for the most part. And she ended up ultimately replacing my Chiaki the Echo. I never actually built Chiaki the Echo because number 41 was actually that good in the turn meter push. She actually pushes, I think, like an additional 15% more than Chiaki the Echo. So that actually can make a big difference. And then even skilling her up is super, super cheap. So these are just like, again, some of the big bang values that you get from some of these characters. Now, the next one is going to be Ashu. Ashu, I think, is pretty straightforward as well, but I think his value is a little bit different in comparison to the first 2 we just talked about. His value actually is going to be quite interesting. It can work in like PvP defenses. It's definitely going to be really good in like certain strategies for things like Doki Doki. When you're talking about the AoE silence, right? That AoE silence means a lot because in a way, the AoE silence is not just necessarily like, you know, preventing the units from using their other abilities, but it's actually inherently decreasing potentially how much damage your overall team is taking, right? Because if you're basically remembering like doing things like Doki Doki, where if you silence the enemies and they're not using their second skill, which is basically the like AoE cleave you, they're now only hitting single target, right? And that's going to give you more odds and a higher probability of being able to clear those dungeons versus not, right? Now, the other thing that actually makes him work really, really well in other strategies is with dot teams, is he has the ability to also stack 3 turns of dot. So this is something that, again, is really interesting with this character because he's not going to be the hardest hitting character, not the highest damage scaling character, but he definitely has a good amount of debuff utility to work in a lot of different team comps to give some sort of value, whether it be like you're doing something in PvP or you're doing something in PvE. He's able to kind of apply himself in those teams as kind of like, you know, that like last rotation or like, you know, kind of like third wing into the comp. Like he's really, really solid. Now you also have in the skill 1, the speed down. Now this is actually one of the things that's quite interesting with Ashu, but for every 10 speed Ashu has, it increases the skill's damage multiplier by 2.5%. Now there's only one other unit in the game that actually scales off of speed, but just for clarity purposes, this was the very first unit that actually scaled off of any sort of speed. And then we have now Ren the Unbowed, whose entire kit is about speed up, scaling off of speed, and, you know, basically AoE nuking. So she's pretty insane too. But yeah, with Ashu, he's supposed to be a character that's built pretty quick. And even like in the combinations or compositions that I've seen him in, he works extremely well for being able to, just like I said, mitigate some of that damage, landing those dots so they're taking damage based off their own HP. And then that slow is huge, man. Speed down, I'm telling you guys, is going to be a massive debuff in this game, especially the deeper you get into the game where things are just so much faster, right? Now, Andrew, let's talk about Unyielding Aegis Andrew, okay? I think that this is another character that kind of gets overlooked. And really it's just because it's a NPC, like it's just an average looking character. But Andrew, the Unyielding Aegis, I think out of the 2 is probably my favorite because he actually has a pretty interesting kit. So in the skill 3, he's able to deal 180% damage to all enemies with an additional damage equal to 60% defense. There's also a 50% chance to inflict 2 turns of defense down. Now with that, one thing that makes him very, very, very valuable, in my opinion, when you're talking about some of those more tank down strategies, is Andrew's HP, when it drops below 65%, his defense will increase by 100%. Now, the thing for this that really matters the most, and this is what I was referring to before, this is a multiplier, right? So when you're talking about the value of how much you can gain from this, it's going to be all based around how much base defense you have. Now, the thing is that when you're talking about then applying a defense up, having them on, like, say, a team with like maybe a Rahu or a Tsukiyomi, or like there's a lot of different ways that you can even go about that. I think even I'm trying to remember, I think Cachi the guard does something with defense as well. Defense immunity. There's a good chunk of characters, I think even regular Ren, that also scales off of defense, that you can kind of play into to allow you to really make use of that defense value that you're basically gaining from the HP threshold. Now, the cool thing is too, is that then in the skill 1, you're able to deal 200% damage with an additional damage increase, additional damage dealt of 60% of your defense. So with that being the case, this actually is going to be making him a pretty hard hitter, which is actually kind of interesting that they gave him a 200% modifier, which again, 200% might not sound like much, but with the additional damage, and then you also are factoring in the defense break, this is going to be massive. And then if he gets a defense up buff, that's inherently increasing further how much damage a character like this can do. So I feel like for those that are looking for like an option for more tanky, just kind of like being able to enable maybe scaling your damage a little bit, but really like bruiser style, I feel like Andrew the Unyielding is going to be a character that's going to surprise a lot of people. But hey, we'll see it when the time comes. Now with that, we also have Cybil. I think Cybil, again, unfortunately, I feel like out of like a lot of the R's, she's not nearly as valuable, but I don't think that she doesn't have any value, right? Now, the thing is, again, very valuable to have a defense break AoE with 4 hits in her skill 3. And each chance or each hit has a 50% chance to inflict 2 turns of defense break, which I would say for 4 hits at a 50% proc chance, that's kind of insane, to be honest. It's like really good. Then when you look at the skill 2, what's really nice with this is that it has a 100%, it deals 3 hits of 100% damage, and the damage increases by 10% for every 10% HP the target is missing. And then you also have the speed up buff. So it has 120% damage with a 40% chance to gain 2 turns of speed up after the attack. Now, one of the things that I really was like, trying to sit and analyze with Cybil was like, well, okay, I feel like the devs gave us characters super intentionally for every single piece of content that we've had to do so far in the game. Why exactly is Cybil here when she's not necessarily a character that thrives at Doki Doki, and she definitely doesn't thrive at Terra Matan? And then when I thought about it, is when you hit level 30, Cybil is actually going to be a potential unit that you can slot onto your Aurora team. Now, the thing is that, again, this is just kind of looking at some of the value that you have in your account already. She has a defense break, which you absolutely can apply to things like, for example, Aurora. Then on top of that, the damage increase that happens based off of every 10% of HP the target is missing, which means that as the fight continues to go on, she's only hitting harder, right? And so that's something that I think kind of gives Cybil value there. With this being on a 3-turn cooldown, which I think also all her abilities are 3-turn cooldown, she's able to rotate this pretty quick. And then the fact that she actually gains 2 turns of speed up, it's actually endorsing the fact that she should be rotating and actually going through her cycle of her abilities pretty quick. So her value is actually, I think, still not necessarily as upfront for some of the things that a lot of players want to aim for in the early game, which is like, trying to do, Doki Doki or Terra Matan and trying to do your shells and stuff like that. But once Aurora actually opens up, you actually have a viable option for DPS, which is kind of crazy when you really think about it. So I was like, okay, like we kind of, been sleeping on some of these R units, not all of them, but definitely ones like this. I'm like, dude, there's always a use for each thing that at least that I'm coming to find, right? Now, the next one is going to be Cachi. Okay, Cachi is a really, really big one that I think a lot of players have overlooked. And there's a few players that actually did catch on to what he does. But I will say, when you're looking at another viable option for the PvE stuff that you need to be doing, this is a character that easily can be slotted into your Terramaton. I mean, you could even do some like very, intricate PvP draft picking if you really wanted to with this character, but he has an AoE stun and then also has the chance to turn meter push back by 35%. Now remember, we're talking about some of the highest characters in the entire game that do this. Kraken, he has a 35% turn meter pushback. Granted, it comes with the CC freeze, so he can like permalock, but I mean, Cachi can still stun. Like that's still pretty powerful because it means that they don't get that turn, right? And they're still taking that 35% turn meter pushback, right? So that's something that I think that's like pretty huge. And then the other thing, which is the icing on top of the cake, is that you grant the 100% turn meter and 2-turn attack up and reduce all the cooldowns of all Animus skills by 1 turn to whoever you grant the skill to too. So this is something that I think again is going to be extremely high value when you're talking about the one thing that most players are going to be typically lacking, which is going to be skill up investment. And this is why skill up pets and being able to have characters that have, skill cooldown pets and skill cooldown units are just going to be extremely invaluable. And they literally give you one for free on your account. And it's literally just what he gets in his kit. You don't have to even level that, right? You only gain defense from actually leveling this skill. That's all jam-packed into the immediate value of the skill as soon as you get it. And then to add insult to injury, they gave him a 30% turn meter pushback in the skill 1. So I'm like, dude, that granted, with a 30% chance, I get it, it is low, but it is still a 30% turn meter pushback in a skill 1 as an R rarity. So I'm like, that's not bad. Now, lastly, we have Andrew. Now, Andrew, this is the Blitz Striker version of Andrew. This one is actually going to be a little bit different. It's more fixated on kind of like the attack down and kind of like, more taunting. So you have a 70% chance to inflict 2 turns of attack down with 240% damage AoE. You have a pretty unique passive, which is called Wrathquake. So after taking action, Andrew assumes a counter attack stance, reducing damage taken by 30% and gaining 1 stacks of Wrathquake for each instance of damage received. The next shattering impact will consume all Wrathquake stacks, and Wrathquake makes it to where each stack increases shattering impacts damage dealt by an additional 16% up to 10 stacks. So this effect cannot be dispelled and is removed after casting shattering impact. Now, the first skill is going to be Iron Fist, where you have that 1 turn of taunt at a 15% chance, but the other thing is that he's in a counter attack stance. So the reason why this is so powerful is going to be because 1, they gave it a lower chance to proc because you're going to be hitting quite a bit. This character is literally, for lack of better words, a like kind of baby version of Viper. Okay. And the crazy thing is that with that, when you have the full stacks come in, you're then going to be able to proc the attack down with the AoE coming from the shattering impact. So this is something that I'm like really interested to even see, where if somebody's able to pull it off with a Viper and someone like Blitz Striker Andrew paired together, how would that look? Right? Like that's actually pretty insane, like in thought, but in reality, this is still a very intricate kit that honestly can work, right? Like I think that that's one of the things is that like this is a character that's what 30% damage reduction, and then when you gain that 1 stack of Wrathquake, you're basically getting all of this damage increase to make your shattering impact hit even harder. So that 240% damage is going to be way more by the time this Wrathquake finishes stacking. So that's a lot of damage. Like, so I honestly think like even with Andrew Blitz Striker, out of all the rares, he might be one of the hardest hitting. So that's something that like, again, it's just kind of crazy value to see coming out of an R rarity unit. And this is what I feel like is going to give the game longevity. Granted, I think it's been very obvious in terms of how well the SRs perform in the game, how well some of the SSRs perform in the game. But I really think that with the R rarity units, I'm actually really excited to see if they continue to add more. I definitely would hope and really honestly would advise them to keep adding more R rarities, especially if they're going to make them this good, because I feel like they're actually giving players a reason to actually build them, number 1, but then 2, they're actually going to be giving them viable multiple choices to be able to get through content where, like, say you don't have the more optimal SR or the more optimal SSR, you still have somebody in the Rs that could actually suffice and maybe get you through that content. And so I think that that's actually one of the nice things that I've been enjoying is that not all of the characters, you don't have any character really at this point that's kind of like, ooh, I'm gonna just throw them in the trash can. You might not use them right now, but it's not necessarily a trash bin character. So let me know how you guys feel about that, man. What do you think about the R rarities? Would you guys like to see more R rarities? What kind of R rarities would you like to see come into the game? Maybe if they were to like throw them, you know, in the game, maybe kind of mirroring a SSR or SR. What kind of R rarity would you like to see that would be able to kind of supplement some of the values that we've already had presented in Etheria? So that's going to be basically that with this one, guys. Let me know what you guys think. Everyone, stay blessed, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.